While the focus in Iowa has, of course, primarily been on the Democratic presidential hopefuls, Republicans do also have a caucus today.
So despite overwhelming support for the president, the Iowa Republican Party is holding their own nominating contest. Here to discuss everything caucuses and more is RNC spokeswoman Liz Harrington. Good to see you, Liz. How are you?
Good to see you, Liz.
Good to see you. I'm good.
So, Liz, I mean, of course, we know President Trump is going to win the Iowa caucuses tonight, but I think broadly what I wanted to focus with you on is the cash-on-hand numbers and all of that. So the RNC and the Trump campaign announced, what is it, $153 million cash on hand and more that's been raised. Just give us an insight into, I always want to highlight it for the audience, it's literally a juggernaut of money that is not being really highlighted by the media.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We just had another record month, the biggest December the RNC's ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Not just a non-presidential year, but just in general.
Yeah.
And that was after the biggest November, which we raised $6 million more in December than we had in November.
Mm-hmm.
And
do you think impeachment is driving some of that energy?
It definitely is propelling us more. We were already breaking records.
Yeah.
Our chairwoman, Ronna McDaniels, does a fantastic job. Obviously, with the president at the top of the ticket, we have a lot of enthusiasm. But impeachment, for sure, has propelled us to, we've had 600,000 new first-time donors since the impeachment push. And it's actually more than the figure you said. With our joint committees, with the RNC, the Trump campaign, and the rest of our committees, it's almost $200 million cash on hand. So we're ready. We just announced 300 new field organizer staffs going out to 18 different states. And we're just continuing to fuel our operation, which we feel very confident about.
There'd been some reporting about your plan on the ground today in Iowa. What is the thought behind sending out so many surrogates? Is this kind of like a warm-up or a trial run? How are you looking at it?
Yeah, so the Trump campaign sent out 80 surrogates, and the idea is, hey, Democrats, they're trying to, say, look at our alternative. Well, look what's already happening in Iowa. We've got great results. Their unemployment rate is down to 2.6%. Just signed historic trade deals that are great for Iowa. We want to be there and say, look, the election's coming up. We have the best candidate at the top of the ticket, and that's President Trump. And look at the results we've seen.
It is
in states
interesting.
like Iowa.
I looked at the head-to-heads in Iowa, and even we would think it might be a Democratic state. President Obama won it. I mean, Trump is beating every single one of those candidates by 5%. It's interesting, Liz. Now you're beginning to think and you're beginning to see who your opponents might shape up in the Democratic race. I've talked to Tim Murtaugh here on the show before. He says there's really no difference in how they'll run the race. Do you agree with that? I mean, is it really? I feel like the opponent really does define so much of it. How are you beginning to think through a Joe Biden or a Bernie Sanders matchup?
Well, of course, every candidate has their different. Well, when we look at weaknesses, all of these different weaknesses on the Democrat side, but going in now when you don't know who it's going to be, the easiest way to look at things is look at the policies they're all embracing. If we're going to run on the issues, there's not a whole lot of difference between a Joe Biden who's now saying we need to get rid of fracking and fossil fuels. Bernie Sanders just introduced a bill to ban fracking. So the way we see it now, they're all embracing ideas that when you have one of your main front runners who looks in a very good position in Iowa and New Hampshire, he happened to honeymoon in the Soviet Union, he happened to love Fidel Castro's, quote, revolution of values, that has seeped its way into the mainstream of the party. And that's what we're running against for absolutely. But yeah, whenever there is a candidate at the end of the day, of course you approach it differently because they're different people, they're different, they have different baggage going into it, whether they've been in the swamp for a half a century like Joe Biden, or they're even more further left like a Bernie Sanders. But we'll see what happens. Anything can happen at this point.
So Senator Joni Ernst recently commented that if Biden were to win the presidency, Republicans would move to impeach him immediately. Now, one of the critiques that came from the Trump campaign and from others that I thought was legitimate is that impeachment should only be used in the most extreme, gravest of circumstances because of the way that it divides the country. Do you think that that would be the right move if Biden were elected to immediately move to impeach him and try to undermine his legitimacy from the jump in the way that you all said that Democrats did with President Trump?
I don't think we'll ever need to impeach Joe Biden because he'll never be president. But I think the point she's making is a very valid one when we haven't even had the acquittal vote, which it should be overwhelming and bipartisan to acquit this president because exactly this point, it is so dangerous to set a precedent to not do your job in the House, not prove your case, not have any evidence, purely partisan. If you have a one-vote majority, you decide to impeach someone, which it is such a divisive thing to do for the country.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be done. And that's why it should be rejected overwhelmingly, not just on the facts and the evidence, which are on the president's side, but for the Constitution and for future presidents. Take Trump out of it. It's a valid point to say that's what the House Democrats are saying the new norm should be.
Would you follow that new norm, though?
I think it's
or should it be
terrible
rejected?
for the country. I think when you see the closing arguments, which we'll see in the coming days, but the previous arguments from the attorneys, Pat Cipollone, and the president's team, playing those clips in the Democrats' own words during the Clinton impeachment, in hindsight, you look at this issue, absolutely, they were right. Why should you do this to the country? One thing, we were kind of chatting about this during the break, though, whether you agree or not whether Bill Clinton should have been impeached, the entire country was fixated on that issue, on that scandal.
Right.
They were paying attention.
Well, it's sex, of course.
They were not, and he was breaking the law. People are not paying attention to this because it is so irrelevant, and it is not an impeachable offense.
I think
Ukrainian arms deals are less sexy than sex.
Certainly. I do also want to ask you to give you an opportunity to dunk on your counterpart, which is that President Trump and others have been raising concerns the DNC is rigging the race against Bernie Sanders. Just give us some insight into how you're looking at the DNC right now. Do you think they are? Are they rigging the race? What do you think?
We can only say what we read in Politico, right? And these other outlets, but it wouldn't be surprising. But it's kind of amusing to see months and months and months nobody's really been attacking anybody. You know, take the DNC out of it. You've had a candidate who has clearly a solid base of support, has never really fluctuated. Well, if you don't want him to be the nominee and you're a Democrat, then make the case, make the argument, show the contrast. I find it behind the scenes trying to do, it's very, it doesn't bring up good things for your party. It's going to pit members of your own party against each other, and I don't think they should do that if that's what they're doing.
Does Sanders' rise and his dismissal by the media, I mean, does that remind you of the way that then candidate Trump was treated last time around? It's something we talk about here.
Yeah, I think there's some similarities when you think of dismissing large swaths of voters and what people are saying and what people are telling you.
Right.
The major difference is the policies are very different.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
But absolutely, you shouldn't just brush off aside and try to say that was what 2016 was largely about. One of the big issues was we want to decide who our president is. We don't want elites and so-called elites who think they're elites in Washington picking the candidate. And after you've been wrong for decades, you've been wrong about issues in Washington, you've shipped our jobs overseas. So of course there's similarities, but I think it was a dissatisfaction with Washington. But absolutely, the Republican Party today is so much more united than the Democrat Party is, and I think that's going to be very beneficial going into November.
It's going to be interesting. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.
Always good to be with you.
Great to have you.
Yep. Next on Rising, Buttigieg campaign spokesperson Jennifer Holdsworth. She describes her candidate's expectations going into tonight. That's next.